Today's teen is growing up in a digital pressure cooker. Their identity is fluid, their self-worth is measured in likes, and truth is often whatever's trending. So in this episode today, we're going to sit down with a senior high youth minister who's on the front lines every day helping teens navigate this chaos. And friends, they face it all, from anxiety and depression to social media issues and spiritual confusion. So if you're a parent, a teen, or someone who just wants to understand the latest on what today's generation is really facing, sit close and turn it up. And welcome back to the Current Temp, sponsored by the amazing team at Lexus of Memphis. Thrilled to have them as a partner with us, a fantastic product, top tier people. And so if you're in that market, please go see them. I'm Joey Solopek, and my guest today is my friend Caleb Norman. Caleb is the senior high minister at Grace Evangelical Church. Thank you for taking time on what is probably the hottest day of the year.
Pleasure to be here.
To be here with us. Caleb, today's world and what our kids are dealing with is really unlike anything I think we've ever seen. Not that there haven't been problems throughout history,
Sure.
But one of the issues we're facing, I'm calling this episode, Today's Teens Are Shaped by Screens. That's a big part of what our kids are facing today. They confuse truth with visibility. They confuse truth with contemporary trends. That line seems to get blurrier every day. And before we dive into this, I want to make sure I tell everybody this is not all bad news. We think there's hope. We think there's direction that you can take, and some advice that I hope we're going to be able to share with you today. But Caleb's going to know that firsthand because he ministers to kids in high school. He walks that with those teens every single day, helping them navigate the wilderness. So let's start with this very broad question. How are teens today struggling with identity and self-worth?
Yeah, obviously a huge question.
Big.
Man, I think one of the things, especially for kids that are in the church, kids that are professing believers, is believing the lie from the jump that self-worth is something to be sought after. I think one of the big things that I'm having to impress upon students is worth isn't something you find in self. And that's even something I would say to parents. One of the big things I actually face with parents is they believe total depravity skipped their kid. They
Flesh
think,
that out for a minute.
Yeah.
Everybody else's kid is the problem?
That their kid's not a sinner. Man, I could count on both hands the times I've had to make a phone call to a parent and say, look, your kid did this. I know for a fact he did this. And they'll respond and they'll say, no, he didn't. My kid would never do that. They just believe that their kid's perfect.
Right.
And so I think the baseline's got to be, look, everybody, your kid included, is a sinner. They are in need of a savior just like everybody else. They're wicked. But then to get more to your question directly about this idea of identity and self-worth, I think many of the students today, whether it's junior high or high school or even sometimes younger than that, it is this idea of self, my self-esteem, my self-worth. And my encouragement to them is always get your eyes off yourself. There is no worth. Caleb doesn't have any worth. There is no.
As a Christian, if we do, it's negative.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think the encouragement to find your identity in Christ, to realize that as a believer, you are first and foremost a forgiven child of God. And that reality is freeing, this constant pressure to perform, to achieve, to be somebody. All of that fades away when you realize, no, my surety's in Christ. My identity, my worth is in Christ, because that's a constant. That's unchanging. And so I think, these things that we're likely to get into later here in a minute about anxiety and depression and screens, all of these things are connected to the first issue, I think, which is a focus on self instead of a rejection of self, a denial of self, and a focus on Christ.
Let's dive into that for just a moment, because I have up here behind us, one of their daily struggles is, who am I? And so in your role, I know you see children and kids and teens who are believers and who are non-believers.
Yeah.
You've got a mixture of both.
Yeah.
Do you see this as a prevalent issue that kids are trying to figure out who they are?
I do, and it kind of falls on both sides, even as believers, young believers, they're still wrestling with this question of who am I? I think often a problem is they see Christianity as part of something, that you as a person are a puzzle and Christianity's part of it. And maybe it's the biggest piece, but they don't quite realize that it's Christ is the only piece of that puzzle. And everything else flows as a result of that reality. But yeah, non-believers and believers alike, I think in the high school stage of life are struggling with that question of who am I? And I think for many, the answer is found in screens, in sports, in a significant other, in friends, in grades. It's found in 100 different places. And so our kind of job or task, for lack of a better term, is to combat that with the gospel.
I'm sitting here thinking that when you're in that age group, let's say junior high to senior high, so many times thinking back, part of our worth is, can I stand out? Can I look at my import, look at my worth, look at me as a better player or as a better student or whatever, which really goes against the gospel message, which is more and more of thee and less of me. And so that's a tough message to tell kids, especially when you're battling our next topic, social media. So this one's going to be a big one, briefly and broadly, because we're going to get in deeper. How would you, if you had to succinctly say it before we dive in, talk about that impact? And I mean, it's a humongous question.
Yeah, that's an impossible question to answer succinctly.
But we're going to get deeper.
I would say, to try and give a quick summary of it, I would say the cons far, far, far outweigh the pros. I mean, I think in ways parents can't even imagine. I think on the whole, again, just to be brief, on the whole, social media, TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, on the whole, is doing so much more damage in your child's life than it is good.
Okay. And choose one off the top of your head.
Yeah.
Choose one of hundreds.
I'll say this briefly. If I were to pick Instagram, I would say Instagram, I think, and maybe this is selfish because I think it's true in my life, I think Instagram has the most positive going for it. I use it, to check schools, sporting events and calendars and things like that. Like, that's my go-to. Like, if I'm wanting to go to a student's football game, I'll go to Houston football and check out their schedule. So I think Instagram does have some positive to it. If I were to pick my least favorite, I don't know why anybody, let alone a teenager, has Snapchat. I mean, I think Snapchat is the epitome of the potential. I'm not saying everybody that's on Snapchat is doing this, but Snapchat is the epitome of the potential to walk in darkness.
Tell me why that is, because I'm not a Snapchatter.
Snapchat was designed originally, and it still functions this way. It was designed to be to disappear immediately.
Secretive?
It's secretive.
Okay.
Yeah. Messages disappear instantly. Pictures disappear instantly. There's probably been a few exceptions, but with very few exceptions, at least once a year, I have a parent contacting me because their son or daughter has done something inappropriate on Snapchat, because it was created for that. Like, it was created to be secretive,
and a lack of accountability,
to be deceptive, to lack accountability, and so I don't know why I don't know in what world it would be profitable for a teen to be on that. At best, it's neutral. I don't think anybody could convince me there are positive benefits to being on Snapchat.
Well, especially since they're at that age where we're trying to teach them accountability and to be forthcoming and to be honest. And here's an entire vehicle built around the premise of it's going to disappear, so we'll hide this. Okay, social media creates unrealistic standards. It's almost like a dopamine addiction. It gives you a false sense of connection. Spiritually, it can often fuel envy, vanity, discontent. So I want to talk through some points here I got. This is from Health Digest. This was from a psychologist who shared the top 3 signs your teen may have an unhealthy social media behavior. Social media, you see an immediate mood swing, a negative mood swing when they've been on social media. They fixate on their appearance. I want you to think of these and you can comment. They fixate on their appearance and are overtly critical of things that are just unrealistic or unattainable. And their self-worth, and this goes for kids and adults, fluctuates depending on social media feedback. Thoughts on those 3 points?
Yeah, I agree with all of it. And I would actually say I have a unique perspective in that I kind of have a case study in the inverse. And what I mean by that is we take them on a week-long trip every summer where they don't have their phones the whole week.
Talk about this. Yeah.
Man, it really is like watching an addict go through withdrawals. The first couple of hours and even
Started off first, though. You get on a bus and
Yes.
you take up phones.
So for the Colorado bus ride, we allow them to have their phones for the first half of the bus ride. So they've got them. We allow them to have them for the first night. So if they want to listen to music or something. But when we wake up in the morning, we take them at breakfast. We take them, and then they don't have them until we're halfway home on the bus ride back. And so that first 24-hour period, it's almost like they're like, what is
Detox.
this place? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But man, it's awesome. It really is awesome to see them throughout the week kind of come out of that stupor, to see them behaving differently, even, dressing differently. Some of that's just pure exhaustion from the trip, but some of that is nobody's taking pictures of me.
No pressure.
Man, we do a fall retreat and we do the exact same thing. We take up phones and we do a lip sync battle. And let me tell you, these kids look forward to it all year, and they make absolute fools of themselves. And I think one of the reasons it's one of my favorite nights of our whole year, and I think one of the reasons it's such a success is all of those kids know they're not being watched. They know that nobody's recording, nobody's posting, they're not going to be
Judging.
teased.
They're
Yes,
not being judged
they're free to be
or
kids.
mocked.
They're free
Right.
to be kids.
Right.
So I completely agree with those points, and I would say I even get to see the benefits of removing those things from their life.
Well, we're going to go through those solutions. So that was just a couple of tips of things to look for. Of course, every parent knows any kid can exhibit these, especially if they're plugged in. So let's talk about this, the answer. How can you help as a parent? What are some things you can do? Let's start with this one, and I'm going to go point by point. Ask considerate questions. Now, when I read that, I thought to myself, and I'm judging myself as a dad, thinking about problems my kids have gone through, and when they were clearly struggling, as I think back and kick myself, did I bring myself down, get out of an authoritarian role, and actually think, let me treat you as a small, even though I'm the dad, I'm the disciplinarian.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that about being considerate of their feelings, because I'm trying to get rid of the stigma that, no, you're going to do what I say.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Considerate questions concerning social media, their whole lives.
Whatever their issues are. What are their trying to figure out what are their problems?
Yeah.
What are they dealing with?
Yeah. I think that's such a slow process too. Like it's something that's so necessary, but it's also something that doesn't happen overnight. It's something that as parents, you've got to build over days, weeks, months, that trust. I would say, regularly I have students confide in me, and sometimes it's sin, and so the inclination there is, well, I don't want to tell my parents because it's sin, and my sin tells me to hide my sin. But other times it's not. Other times it's just, I don't think my parents will understand. I don't think they care. And some of those feelings, I'm sure, are invalid. They're lies from the enemy. But some of those feelings are a result of the relationship that's been built
right.
between the parents and the child. And so I completely agree with asking considerate questions. And I would encourage parents that perhaps start doing this and don't see the results they want. Rome wasn't built in a day. You're gonna have to persevere in that. As
I read these, to your point, I saw my own guilt there through my kids' eyes of, I just wanted to fix things. Dads are fixers.
Yeah.
And I'm going fast. What's your problem? Let's fix it. However, the second part of this is not to just ask considerate questions, but as you just mentioned, listen patiently.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do for a dad and some moms. Moms that want to jump in and fix and cut off. We do that. We override each other.
Yeah.
We cut each other off. That's a skill set that's lost, especially as parents. You don't even think about it with your kids. But and you give me your insight on this, don't kids want to be heard?
They do. And what's funny too, I experience this in different ways with my students, but sometimes you have to realize high schoolers, they almost need to be shown what they want and don't want. They might reject something in the moment only to realize they like it. A popular example for me is music. I'll play music in Mike's place and they're like, what is this? This stinks. And then 2 weeks later, they're like, dude, I listened to the whole album. It's awesome.
Right.
And so sometimes there might be initial resistance as they're feeling things out, but then you kind of peel back the layers of the onion. And so when it comes to listening, again, you might get rejected early. You might get one-word answers. You might get, I don't want to talk about it. Like, it was fine, But as they learn, like, oh, like mom really does care. Mom keeps asking me, oh, Dad really does care. He really
Persistence.
Exactly. I do think that it's a learned behavior to kind of let that guard down. And again, I don't want to paint with broad strokes. Some kids are ready right away. Like, man, let me tell you everything I did. And some kids it's much more difficult. So I don't want to say follow steps 1, 2, and 3, and here's how to get your kid to open up. But I do think that perseverance and consistency are really key in that progress.
Well, I was coming at this from the point of parents, that we're wired a certain way. We want discipline. We want you to obey. We want you to do what we say. But when we get to this high school years, they become different creatures.
Yeah.
And so just thinking back on my own life, parents I know, I was thinking, okay, let's ask better questions. Let's listen. And this is one that really hit me at home. Once I get those answers that I may not like, I need to be gentle. Because quite often that might be what scares the kid in the first place, like you said, from even wanting to have that conversation.
Yeah, man, I love that you brought that up, because I've actually got a story that I love to share about my dad. It's probably one of my top 5 favorite memories of my dad. I was in college, and I was about to, it wasn't finished, but it was all said and done. I was about to fail a class. It was the first class that I'd ever failed. And it was not because I was stupid. It was because I neglected it. I didn't try hard, and I was completely to blame for it. And I spent weeks, and I mean weeks, not falling asleep till 4 a.m., just wrapped in anxiety over telling my parents, like just worried as all get out about it, like just terrified to tell my dad. And I came home one weekend, and it was just me and him in the house, and we were in the kitchen. I remember where I was standing, and I remember finally getting the courage to tell him, and being prepared to be chewed out, to be yelled at, for him to say I've wasted his money, to say I was, and he would have been justified in all of that. And he just walked over to me and gave me a hug, and he said, "I love you, son, and it's going to be okay." And I just started crying like a baby. I mean, it was like the world had been lifted off my shoulders. And now there were 1,000 times in my life where my dad was the disciplinarian, where he didn't spare the rod. But man, that moment where he showed me grace, where he chose to be gentle when I opened up to him, truly is one of the most impactful things he's done in my life.
And what a great example to show you that through action and not telling you.
Yeah.
Which is a big part of what we really, I think, try to talk about as parents and teachers. Let's act out what we believe instead of just telling them, which brings me really to my last point, which I love this last point. Don't ever shame or diminish or lecture your kid if they approach you with that struggle, because once again, to your point of how your dad responded to that, that's sort of what they're expecting if you don't have a good relationship.
Yeah.
But if we think through these things in advance and try to quell our own natural predilections as parents, don't you, from the perspective you've seen, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think on both of these last 2 points, the being gentle and the not shaming them, I do think discipline is necessary. It's healthy. It's good. I mean, Scripture is clear that is needed, but I think it's important that your kids understand discipline and love are not mutually exclusive. And so, if their struggle does come with, I've snuck out 10 times this month. Well, there's going to be consequences. I'm not going to shame you. But there's going to be consequences. But immediately after the discussion of consequences, immediately after the discipline, affirming the relationship there, I think is really key, so that they understand that this is both done in love, and it's not at the expense of their love. That, oh, well, Dad has done this and now he hates me or he's disappointed in me. It's no, Dad loves me enough that he's willing to care
to discipline me.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We're going to jump from that into a big one: gender identity, sexuality, and truth. Teens are bombarded with these confusing messages at an age where they're really looking for guidance, like you said. Who am I supposed to be? How can we as parents, when quite often the schools don't help us, social media doesn't help us? What are some ways we can address this with compassion and yet help them move forward?
Yeah, it's a great question, and definitely a relevant topic in this culture. I think a big thing, the starting point has got to be that Christians are unique. Like, I would put Christians in their own camp on this discussion. This isn't my quote. I forget who said it. It was a pastor. I heard it in a sermon, but he said, those on the political left say if you don't support, you hate. And those on the political right say if you don't hate, you support. And the Christian comes in and says, no, you're wrong and you're loved. And I think that's got to be the starting place is, no, homosexuality is wrong. God says it's wrong. Transgenderism, gender fluidity, all of that is wrong. Scripture's clear it's wrong. It's not a question of what's God's stance on this. It's a question of, are you going to submit to the authority of God or not?
Right.
That's clear. But I think also it's also got to be clear that these are image bearers. They are made in the image of God, and perhaps many of them are going to be believers later in life, you know? And so I think the starting place has got to be, again, without question, with absolute certainty and clarity, this goes against what God has said in Scripture. But I do think the Christian holds a unique perspective in that we are willing and must say that they're wrong, but simultaneously are called to love them. You know, I think of, there's several times Jesus displays this in his earthly ministry. He does it with the woman at the well. He does it with the adulterous woman surrounded by the mob, and he does it with Zacchaeus. And in all three of these instances, you find him with a woman, or with a person rather, that is despised by society, that people are saying if you don't support, you hate, and if you don't hate, you support. And Jesus comes onto the scene, and I think specifically with Zacchaeus is hated, he's despised, he's rejected, and Jesus says, I want to eat with you. I want to have a meal with you. That's love when no one else was willing to love Zacchaeus. But that's not all Jesus does. Jesus also says, Zacchaeus, you're a pretty wicked sinner, and you need to repent of your sin. And so we see Jesus modeling it. We see Jesus saying, you're loved, but you're wrong, and I'm going to call you out of your sin. And so I think that's got to be the position Christians take, is not one of this dogmatic hatred of, down with all the homosexuals, you know, but it also can't be, well, God made everybody the way they are. And,
Correct.
you know, both are wrong. And we're called to love, and to love doesn't mean to accept. To love means to live out truth.
Let me kind of add this, reinforce everything you said, which I agree with. As believers, we believe in absolute truth and absolute morality, you know, but Ephesians 4:15 says, speak the truth in love.
Yeah.
And like you said, a great example about Zacchaeus, and, you know, nobody ever won an argument screaming on Facebook.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody ever led a Christian to Christ screaming on Facebook.
Yeah.
Let's transition from that into another big one for me, which is peer pressure and FOMO.
Yeah.
Fear of missing out. And this is a huge topic because peer pressure, fear of missing out, being left behind, is one of the strongest forces I feel that affects teens, trying to fit in, trying to be a part of the clique or be part of a group. How does a young person, especially one with Christian beliefs, how do they stand firm if they feel pressured to fit in? Let's start with that one. There's a couple of angles here, but what would you say to a young person who, and we remember those feelings.
Yeah.
I want to fit in, so I'm going to bend my morality a little bit.
Yeah, I think the encouragement is similar, not the same, but similar to the identity question. I think a lot about, you know, do not fear those who can only kill the body and not harm the soul, but fear him who can destroy both the soul and the body in hell. And so it's an acknowledgement that peer pressure ultimately, like if you strip back the facade, if you take the lipstick off the pig, peer pressure is ultimately a fear of man. It's a fear of man's approval. It's a fear of fitting in with man. And so I think one of the really healthy things as we try to lead our children well is to encourage them to live their life for an audience of one. That it's not about, you know, well, Sally's going to think I'm lame for not going to this party. I don't care. Sally's not your God. God's your God. And so really teaching them from a young age that you live to please God. You know, whether you eat or drink, whatever you do all things to the glory of God. And that's a terrifying command. If that were the only command in Scripture, I'd be headed to hell apart from the grace of God. And so, man, whatever I do, you know, whether it's waking up in the morning and making my bed, or if it's whether to make the decision to go to that party or hang out with that person or do that thing with my significant other, whatever it is, the ultimate question's got to be, am I glorifying God in this? And only when you're rooted in that. You know, I think one of the things we see in really well-churched people is I think of the movie Good Will Hunting. There's a scene in Good Will Hunting where Sean, the therapist, is kind of rebuking and challenging Will. And he says, Will, you could tell me every detail about the Sistine Chapel, but you couldn't tell me what it smells like inside of it. And he says, you could quote me all the poets of Shakespeare about love, but you don't know what it's like to really love a woman. And his point is, you know all the right answers, you know all the right things to say, but it hasn't actually hit here. You haven't actually lived it. And so I think on the other side of this coin, there's almost a, well, if I just do the right things, go through the motions, say the right things, well, then I'm good. And that's not the goal either. We're not after behavioral modification. We're after heart change. And so, we don't want our kids to be peer pressured into going to those parties, but we also would hate for our kids to say no to those parties for legalistic reasons or checking of boxes. Ultimately the goal is I want my kid to see that honoring Christ is what matters most, and I want that to be rooted in their hearts.
All right, this one's a little trickier. The second part of that equation, FOMO, fear of missing out.
Yeah.
Because in our experience, my wife and I, we were hardcore against Instagram.
Yeah.
And Snapchat,
Yeah.
because everybody was trying to see, am I being left out?
Sure.
Am I being left out?
Sure.
And we see that in the schoolyard. We see it in church groups. We see cliques. We see issues. What would you say about someone who has a fear of being left out? And at the same time, what would you say about the kid who's kind of an outsider, who's awkward, who comes into a church
Sure.
and wants to be a part of something?
Yeah. To the first part of that question, the fear of missing out in general, and especially things like Instagram, my encouragement would be to the parents, don't be afraid to parent. If you have a conviction, follow your conviction, and I think you're obligated to. And so if you're convinced, especially as the father, the tone setter in the home, if you as a dad are convinced it would be bad for my kid to have Instagram, I don't care what Timmy's dad is doing. And it's not, by the way, it's not wrong for Timmy's dad to be doing that. But if you have a conviction, if you've been convicted in this, well, you need to follow it. So I know that's certainly easier said than done. But I don't think we need to worry about, well, what are the Joneses doing? I think the bigger question is, where has the Lord convicted you? Where do you feel led as the leader of the home? What do you believe? And then you've got to lead your home accordingly. And then I think when possible, you don't owe your kids this, but I think when possible, helping your kids understand the why behind your decision is really impactful. There are certainly times where my dad would say, because I'm in charge. And that was the right answer. It was right for my dad to say that. But there are other times where letting your kids behind that curtain a little, understanding the why behind your decision, I think can be really profitable for them.
Let me add this before we get to the second part of the question. I like giving solutions. One of the things we did that worked really well for us, and I give all this praise to my wife, my kids were not allowed to have Instagram. She had it on her phone, my wife, and because they communicate.
Yeah.
And you want your kid to be involved. And so that was the big problem is I want them to be involved, and that's how they're communicating. Well, you can't just walk away from it and go, I give up. So she would say, you want to check in? You check in on my phone. We'll log in, and I'm going to sit here with you. And if I find something out about one of your friends that shows up here that's negative, be prepared, because we're going to cut off that relationship.
Yeah.
And that worked really well.
Yeah.
I mean, it really did.
I think another thing, I haven't used it yet, and I won't say the name of it unless you give me permission, but I just bought a product, actually.
Go ahead.
It's called Brick. I haven't even got it yet, but I've seen it online, and I got it for myself, and what it does is it's both a physical thing and an app. And what you do is you can tap your phone to it, and whatever you have gone into the app and said, when I tap my phone on this, I want you to block it. And so for me, it's a productivity tool. I'm going to block, Instagram, social media, everything while I'm at work. I don't want to be tempted to jump on it. I'm going to do it at 9 o'clock at night, so I'm not tempted to doom scroll till midnight. But I think that's that could be a really positive tool for parents as well.
Yeah.
And you also have the ability to make it where while it's tapped, you can't mess with the app. So like your kid couldn't go in at school and go delete the app and re-get back on Instagram. Yes. So you could have the Brick at home. You could make your kids tap it before they leave the house in the morning.
Interesting.
And they wouldn't be able to get on Instagram. They would only be able to get on what you've given them permission to get on. And
I love
then
that.
when they get back home, they could tap it. So I think that's
Amazon? Where can you get it?
I just found it. It was actually, believe it or not, I found it as a targeted ad on Instagram.
Okay.
But yeah, I think it's just brick.com, but it's a little gray gray brick, and it's a great productivity and parental tool.
Okay, that's excellent. Now let's jump to the kid who walks in the back, little different, new, doesn't know how to fit in.
Yeah.
How do we help that kid?
Yeah, I think I'll answer that question of how do we help him in a minute. I would say if you're the parent of that kid, I think encouraging them, keep showing up. Keep going. Life's hard. I promise the hardest thing that kid faces isn't going to be youth group. His life's going to get harder, not easier. And so, I know that's easier said than done. But I think encouraging your kids to do hard things, to do things they don't even like showing up to a youth group where they don't feel like they fit in yet. We don't want to teach our kids that you should quit because it's hard. I remember when I was young, I was on a baseball team that was just awful. I mean, we were so bad. And I remember pulling into practice one night and I said, Dad, I want to quit. And he said, you can quit at the end of the season because I made a commitment. And I think you should make church a commitment as well. Go ahead.
Let me jump in, though, and I'm going to play advocate for a moment. When you're a parent, there are few things as heartbreaking or as hard to deal with a kid not fitting in.
Oh, absolutely.
And we've all been there.
Yeah.
I've been there when I was a kid. We go through those stages, each of us,
Yeah.
Awkward,
Yeah.
new kid, you've changed schools, whatever.
Yeah.
But sometimes, like we've had that conversation about sports with all of our kids.
Yeah.
When you're watching a kid have trouble fitting in, and you're in a unique position to deal with that.
Sure.
How do you approach it?
Yeah, I would say one of the cool things too, and now this is not 100% success rate, but I would say there are kids in my ministry right now that would fit the bill of what you just described, and they've now got an awesome friend group and they love showing up to youth group because they persevered. As far as helping on my end, what's my responsibility, what's my role, I really task, at our church we have what we call the serve team, and it's a group of students that are wanting to own the ministry further. And I have really made for them, I think it's Mark 10, and it's in the 30s and 40s, where this encounter with Jesus and the 12, and two of them want to sit at Jesus' left and right hand in glory. And so we see them seeking status, and, the other 10 are like, well, time out. If anybody's going to sit there, it's going to be me. I deserve that spot. And Jesus rebukes all of them. And he says, you have seen how the non-believer operates. You've seen how the world operates when it comes to leadership and authority, and they use it for self-serving purposes. But he says, for those that follow me, the first shall be last. And he goes on, of course, to say a verse that's often quoted, for the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and give his life up as a ransom for many. And that's kind of the staple verse, the mission statement of our serve team. And I say to them over and over and over again that Christian leadership primarily looks like sacrifice and service, sacrificing for others and serving others. And one of the major ways in which I encourage them to live that out, and I would say that they're good about really doing it, is I encourage them, look, if you see anybody that's new or you see anybody that's sitting alone or standing alone pre-service, like the number one goal of the serve team as far as functionality is to seek those people out, to make them feel included, to make them feel welcomed. We do a thing, and this is intentional as well. We start every service, I call everybody to sit down, and we start every single service with very few exceptions. We start with a this or that question, like a would you rather type question. And I ask the question, and then I say, all right, everybody stand up and ask those around you, go. And the purpose of that is for everybody, but specifically my serve team. All right, where's that kid that I talked to earlier? Where's that kid that is visiting? I'm going to go ask them, would you rather fight one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses? Stupid questions, but the goal really is let's make a connection. Let's give a connection. Let's start the building blocks of this friendship so that these people that are either new or perhaps have been here a while and aren't quite plugged in start to feel like this place is home for them.
For anybody listening, that goes for adults as well. Honestly, that is a common thing. And I know that way back when I was searching for churches, and this is a common thing. You go into a church, if somebody doesn't come up and be personable or introduce themselves or at least say, hey, do you know where you're going? You don't feel like you're a part of that community, and that's what we're called to do. All right, I know I've kept you a little long. I'm going to try to get through a couple of these last ones, but this is a big one. And I know this is something this is a critical one. Twofold. We've got exploding problems with pornography,
Yeah.
because we've put a TV screen in every child's hand,
Yeah.
and sexual temptations. That's the first part. And then we're
Yeah.
going to talk about, and sometimes these go hand in hand, anxiety, depression, and thoughts of suicide. These are something that we've seen dramatic. You just look at the data.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've seen
Yeah.
it. Huge increases in that. You know, we're talking about, you're running in circles where you see kids who are part of church families, and there are also kids who are not part of church families that are coming and seeking. Let's start with the pornography and sexual temptations. What do you see, and what advice would you give to a parent?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is to circle back to something you asked me earlier when I said broadly that social media is doing far more harm than good. I don't think parents realize how much basically, if not outright, pornography is on social media apps.
And just available.
I mean, I enjoy following sports pages, and I've had to cut back on how many sports pages I follow on Instagram. Any parent watching this can do it right now. Go to ESPN, go to SportsCenter, go to anything that's dude related, and open up a new post. If you're the first 30 minutes, you open the comment section, there's bots there selling you pornography. On Instagram. You know, we're not talking about Pornhub, we're talking about Instagram. And so that's what I mean when I say, like, man, we're gonna give a 14-year-old boy unchecked access to Instagram or Snapchat. Now, again, I'm not on Snapchat, but I can only assume the same is true there. And so, like, man, we're just setting them up for failure.
What bullet points? And listen, this is a hard one to approach. Yeah. What bullet points would you give? Because back 10 years ago, I was looking for filters on the phone. And even those kids can get around those.
Sure.
What are some? We're trying to reach them up in a way they should go. But any tips on that? Any advice?
Yeah, I think, man, again, and you can circle back to this question if I don't answer it directly here. I'm going to try to, but it might not be what you're looking for. I think really the heart is the problem. Now, again, that doesn't mean, well, I really hope we train your heart up and here's Instagram we've got to be wise as leaders for these children. But I think helping young men and young women understand two things. The first is that some of the desires they're having are not bad. I think there is a temptation from the church and from parents to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think it's really important that parents help their kids understand, no, the desire for sexual intimacy, the desire for sex is a wonderful gift from God, but you only in the confines of which God has prescribed it. We don't want to tell our kids sex is bad. No, it's not. It's a wonderful gift from God in the marriage bed.
Right.
So I think the first step is helping them understand, hey, everything you're feeling is not wicked. Some of it's actually healthy, but misplaced. And then that leads me to the second thing I would say, differentiating between healthy sexual desire, healthy desire for intimacy versus lust. Because all pornography, all pursuits of that is just lust. That's not a healthy desire for intimacy or for a marriage relationship. And to make a distinction, I would say the desire for sexual intimacy done rightly is God honoring, and it's God focused, and it's focused again ultimately on your wife or your husband. Lust strips all of that away. Lust is almost primal. It is focused on self. It almost strips the personhood away from the other person and makes them an object of your own gratification. And so I think helping your children understand, A, that your desires are, at least some of them, healthy, and then secondly, what you're chasing after isn't even healthy or right in God's eyes. You're chasing a lie from Satan, and you're ultimately, and this is important too, you're chasing a watered down version of what God offers. I think helping our children understand that God's commands for us really are good. What God prescribes for us really is good. To abstain and remain pure for marriage really is better than lusting after 100 women or men. God really does know what's best for us.
Part of the other issue there too, and it's something that is just so diabolical, is that kids learn from observing around them, and they also learn from the mediums they're exposed to. Back in the day, it may have been watching Happy Days, or growing up later and then watching other shows and seeing how people interacted and how social norms, how you respond to each other. Now we have formats, even on free TV, that anything goes, and kids that aren't guided and have a foundation think, oh, this is how you're supposed to be and act. And in the case of pornography, all that's fake anyway.
Yeah.
It's all an orchestrated, airbrushed falsehood that kids that aren't instructed, if they think that's how, you're constantly trying to learn as a kid. And I think as we get older, we lose that memory of the sponges they are, trying to absorb who am I supposed to be, and what am I supposed to act like. And they need some guidelines to kind of say, here's your guardrails.
Yeah.
That it's not freedom to sin, it's freedom from sin.
Yeah.
That those things that the gospel says don't do actually save you. It's like, hey, don't hit yourself in the face with a hammer, because that's going to hurt, right?
Yeah.
Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say to the fathers, again, I think another thing that at times the church can do poorly is pretend or assume that it's only a male issue. It's not. It affects men and women. But I will comment specifically for men and for fathers. I would encourage fathers to be proactive. I know it's uncomfortable. I know it's strange. But being proactive and engaging in that dialogue, and that'll look different person to person, but being proactive and teaching your son, training up your son, hey, this is how we view women. This is what lust is versus appropriate sexual desire. This is what it looks like to not give into youthful passions. Being proactive. Don't wait till your kid comes to you and says, Dad, I've got a full-blown porn addiction. Start that conversation early and train them in what it looks like to have healthy desires and God-ordained desires versus desires of the flesh.
And going back to how we kind of started this, make sure parents, you're working to create open lines of communication, because if your kid doesn't feel, there's not always going to be a Caleb for them to go talk to, or you want them to be able to communicate. My wife did this actually this morning. She sent a video to our kids and said, to our two boys, hey, your dad does these things, remember them. And it was a gentleman going, open the door for a lady, carry the heavy grocery bags.
Yeah.
If there's a seat available, give a person a seat. Just the basics of let's stand up and do what we're supposed to do. And so I use it as a jumping off point to say, to your point, being a parent is not for the weak of heart, and you can't be lazy.
Yeah.
And that's really one of the biggest issues I remember as a young parent is going, man, this is a lot of work and I'm tired. But if you go the other route and hand the kid an iPad and say, I want to go do something else, you're going to deal with those repercussions. This
was actually a quote from Jordan Peterson, and he's not a believer, so take his wisdom with a grain of salt. But he said something once that stuck with me. He said, conflict delayed is conflict multiplied. And I think that's true in parenting. If you're going to delay in training up your children, it might not show up when they're 12, but it might show up when they're 30, and it's going to be a whole lot messier than if you had dealt with it when they were in your home.
And for anybody out there who says, I don't know how to handle this, 1 Peter 5:7, one of my favorite verses, cast all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. All right, now we are almost at the end. I've kept you here for a long time. I've got two more questions. This is a complete left turn. How do you keep kids, especially when they're leaving high school, let's say, and going to college? How do you keep them from walking? You can't just keep them. How would you encourage a parent to help your kid to not walk away from their faith?
Yeah, I love the clarification there, because I agree. I think it's important that parents realize you can't.
Right.
Because I have had conversations with those parents. What do I do to keep my kid from falling away, or my kid did fall away? What did I do wrong? And man, there is so much freedom in trusting the sovereignty of God. I mean, there is so much freedom. It doesn't make it easier all the time, but there's so much freedom in trusting that God is sovereign over everything. By
the way, let me interject to your point right there. Quite often, one of the ways I got through those moments, handing a kid the keys to the car and thinking, oh my gosh, I would say to myself, God, I know you love them more than I do.
Yeah. And I know we don't have much time, but to briefly answer the anxiety question, I would say most of anxiety stems from a desire to be God in his place.
Right.
That it is, I want to control these things.
Let it breathe. We got plenty of time for that, because that's a big one.
I think, I've taught on this before in the high school ministry, and I would say that anxiety is often, not always, often traced back to one of three things, if not all three things. It's all a desire to be God, but it fleshes itself out in three ways: a desire to be in control, a rejection of your finiteness, and a desire to be all-knowing. Most, if not all, anxiety, and I'm speaking as somebody that has dealt with anxiety most of his adult life. Most of Caleb Norman's temptations to be anxious are rooted in Caleb's desire to be God in one of those three ways, that I either want control in how do I keep my kid from, I'm going to keep my kid from falling away. You know, I'm going to keep my kid from not crashing the car. A rejection of finiteness. And I think this is one that's slept on in the church community. Go
Explain
ahead.
that. Explain rejection of finiteness.
Yeah, that we think that we can live and act as gods ourselves, that we can, you know, jam our schedules full every minute from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., that we can get 7 hours of sleep and run off, you know, Alani's and Chick-fil-A and just jam, go, and never feel the repercussions of it. That's just not true, and it's not biblical. In fact, one of the greatest sins of Israel early on was God told them every seventh year to have a land fast where they weren't to reap or sow, they weren't to do anything. And for something like 400 years, they ignored it because they said, we're good. We don't want to rest. We're going to do what we want to do. We're going to reject our humanness, our creatureness, and we're going to push it to the limits. And I think, man, even for myself to go back to the screens, whenever I go on vacation, I make a concerted effort to not be on my screens. The way I relax and unwind is getting out in nature. I love hiking. I love camping, and it's restorative for me. But even on those trips, I've got to remind myself, pause, breathe. Even here when I'm at home working, I've got to force myself at times. Caleb, you're not going to go do this today because you're a creature. And so it's no wonder some of the times we feel so anxious and worked up when it's like, hey, maybe if you just ate a healthy meal and got some solid sleep, you'd feel better. And then the last one, and I think this is a really common one in teens, is the desire to be all-knowing, just paralyzed by what school should I go to, who should I date, what job should I take. And it's true for adults too. There's just a lot of changes happening at this phase of life for them. And it's a desire to have all those answers, to have, you know, I want to know what's the best answer. And it often will present itself at what's God's plan for my life. You know, that's a big question. And I always tell people, and I love this answer because it's scripture. It's 1 Thessalonians 5:3 says, this is the will of God for your life, your sanctification. And so whenever I have somebody that's anxious, that's worrying about, you know, what job do I take? What school do I go to? Do I play this sport or not? I always tell them the same thing, and it's this: God cares far less about where you go and far more about how you act while you're there. God does not care. Now, I will preface with, if you feel convicted by the Spirit in something and you defy that, well, that's a different story. But if you've prayed about it, if you've sought wise counsel, if you've searched the scriptures, and you feel that both are quality options. Let's say I'm a senior and I'm weighing UT versus Ole Miss. Well, if I've prayed about it, sought counsel, I've gotten into both schools, the scholarship's equal, all things are equal. What's God's will for my life?
Clearly Memphis State, but go ahead.
What's God's will for my life? You know, if I go to Ole Miss and he meant Tennessee, am I going to miss my husband because he's at UT and I'm going to miss my job?
Right.
No. God cares far more about what you're going to do, who you're going to be. Like, God doesn't care whether you choose UT or Ole Miss, but he cares if you're plugged into a church. He cares if you're going to throw your life to drugs and partying and sex. Like, God cares far more about your sanctification, and his will for your life is your sanctification, that you would conform more and more to Christ. And so I think a great relief, a great burden reliever for people anxious over not knowing is, if you've prayed about it, sought wise counsel, searched the scriptures, and you've done that, and all things are equal, God doesn't care. God says, go do one of them and honor me in the process.
Man, so well said. I want to add this about anxiety, because I think everybody deals with that. Our world is predicated on making you anxious that you don't have enough, you're not doing enough, you're not being enough.
Yeah.
And I think Spencer Galarno said this. I'm going to give him credit for it anyway, but it's one of my favorite quotes, and it is, he said, anxiety has a hard time surviving in a Thanksgiving-rich atmosphere.
Yeah.
And when you think that through, if you wake up and open your eyes with anxiety, if you just start with, thank you that I have a bed to sleep in, and that there's a roof I'm looking at, and maybe I have air conditioning, and I think I've got a meal I can go to, you finally start seeing your anxiety levels drop.
Yeah.
Brilliant points. All right, we are almost done. Let me ask you this, and this is how we're going to kind of wrap this up. You know, teens watch us as parents and listen and see our actions maybe more than they listen to our words. I know that
Sure.
to be true personally. I'm sure you do as well. And so parents have to be consistent and intentional with that truth. What advice would you give to parents, grandparents, family members who are trying to be a role model or influence a kid?
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
Yeah, man, it was Spurgeon that said, train up a child in the way that they ought to go and be sure that you follow down the same path.
Okay.
And I think that strikes right at the heart of what you're getting at is be an example. If you have a do what I say, not what I do policy, you're going to find it hard. Your kids are going to find it hard to follow you. Because, like you said, they observe behavior. I would also add, in a different vein, I would say don't be afraid to be a parent. Your kids
not a
don't.
friend.
Your kids don't need a friend, nor do they need a drill sergeant. They need a parent. And so that's a hard line to find, but it's one you've got to walk. And then I also would say resist the temptation to seek out behavioral modification only. We aren't.
Say that a different way.
Yeah.
Flesh that out.
It's really easy if you see your kid doing something to just try to get them to stop doing it if it's negative. But all that does is create Pharisees. Pharisees were really great external rule followers who had hearts of stone and hated God and his word. And so as parents, the goal ultimately, now there may be times where immediate behavior modification is needed,
Sure.
and that follows
Right.
from heart change. But the ultimate goal of the parent is not to create a bunch of nice societal moralistic people. The goal is to raise up children that love and worship God. And so resist the temptation to stop at simple behavioral changes, and press forward into instilling values that go past it, seeking heart change ultimately. And even if your kid's already a Christian, the same rule applies, because sanctification, even though it's external, is ultimately internally rooted. And so, yeah, as you're seeking to lead your kids well, and you lead by example, to the fathers, I would say you're to be the chief reconciler in the home. To the fathers, I would say the way you treat your wife is going to be observed by your children, positively and negatively. And then I would say to both parents, the way you treat each other is going to be observed. Do you honor one another? Do you respect one another? Are you tearing each other down in front of your kids? Are you tearing each other down behind your backs to your kids? I think one of the things that's really, really healthy for a Christian home is for the kids to see mom and dad following Christ together. I think that's a really huge piece of the puzzle when it comes to kids observing and following suit.
Listen, you have said some brilliant stuff. I want to finish with Deuteronomy 6 and 7. These commandments, impress them on your children. Friends, just a reminder, pulling up to church and dropping your kids off. Church is not there to fix your kids. Church is there for your kids, but it's there for you as well. And it really works when the family unit is combined. Would you agree?
Oh
Disagree?
my gosh, yeah. And I would say, again, dads, husbands, like this responsibility falls on your shoulders. If you are falling asleep in church and you're uninterested in the music and you're uninterested in the sermon and you're beelining for the exits when church gets out, your kids notice. They notice. And they're going to, and here's the thing, they might not even realize they're realizing this, but they're either consciously or subconsciously noting this whole church thing doesn't seem to really matter to dad. So I don't really care about it.
Yeah, right.
Man, we have a section of students sit with us each week, and I love it. And it typically changes by week, which I also think is healthy. And I love that they sit with us, but I would also encourage parents sit together as a family, at least from time to time, because I think it's important for kids to see their parents worship, to see their dad worshiping God, to see their mom worshiping God. I think that's really, really healthy, and I think should start at a young age. Grace of Ann has Family Life Sunday, where I'm not sure exactly what the age is, but I know it's young, where we encourage the kids to come in and be a part of corporate worship. And one of the goals of that, there's a lot of goals for it, but one of the goals of that is kids, we want you to see mom and dad worshiping this God. And that only becomes more and more important as they get older, that they see their parents living out what they're proclaiming.
I love it. Fantastic wisdom. Caleb Norman, senior high minister at Grace Evangelical Church. A phenomenal job. I cannot say enough.
Thanks
Friends,
for having me.
Listen, once again, I want to thank Lexus of Memphis for being such a great sponsor and teammate here with the Current Temp. And you just got the Current Temp on what our kids are doing. And remember, you can find us not just on Facebook, we're on YouTube and Spotify. And if you have an idea or a comment, email us. You can email us at thecurrenttemp@gmail.com. Caleb, phenomenal job. I hope that was worth your time, that you'll remember some of those great points that he made, and we will see you next time on the Current Temp.